effectively what gravity is more of like a push. Well, it's an acceleration. Acceleration and gravity are indistinguishable from each other. If you put yourself in a box, and we sent you off, and this box had no windows, how could you tell you were moving or not? If you're moving with a constant velocity or stationary.
Yeah.
So that's where the idea of reference frames come into it. Relativity, the idea of relativity. Motion's relative, time's relative. It's not unique. As Newton would say, there's an absolute time and absolute space, and Einstein says, well, no, that's not possible, otherwise the speed of light would change for everyone. So yeah, gravity, like I say, it's an acceleration of, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. We replace that A with G most of the time when we're talking about an object accelerating if we throw it, if you like. But it's accelerating due to the force of gravity. Where are we going?
Well, I'll move from that on to. I'll move from that on to. You mentioned. He was talking about gravity, weren't you?
Yeah.
So, in terms of knowing is it the four laws?
Yeah,
four fundamental laws.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
Yeah. So one of the things we wanted to talk about was obviously Stephen Hawking's career and his timeline for his career.
Yes.
And I know we've touched on subjects that I wanted to bring up. So I know we touched on relativity.
Yeah. So.
And I was just wondering how the research that he did. I'd say it's it's midway through his career. Was talking about black holes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have seen the film about his life.
Yeah.
Of everything, and he was fascinated by black holes. Which obviously Stephen Hawking was his job title, if you like, was a relativistic cosmologist. So he looked at cosmology, which is the study of the universe as a whole and how it began and how it's got to where it is now and where it's going, from a general relativity point of view. But obviously he did know quantum mechanics as well. So his maths was very good.
See, I thought it was surprising because I watched an interview that he did in his latter years, and he was talking about his inspirations for science. Who do you think is your biggest inspiration in science? And I was expecting him to say Einstein because he'd started with a relativity background. But he didn't. He said not far. Did he say? Is it Faraday who was the first?
Or Maxwell, James Clerk Maxwell.
No, who did you say was the beginning, the forefather of it?
Galileo.
He said Galileo.
Yeah.
And there's another quote from.
Didn't know that myself.
Yeah. I was surprised because of his background.
Yeah.
And he also is quoted saying, if scientists had the amount of time, an infinite amount of time from when they was born, the scientists, the forefathers that created science, would have answered the questions that we're still asking by now.
Yeah.
Because he must have believed that maybe you don't have enough time as you need to answer the questions that you start out with.
Yeah.
And I love that part of his mentality where it was. In terms of him struggling through his life and obviously with his condition and stuff, that he didn't let things like that stand in his way, that he always fought through, and it seemed like he was always trying to answer the questions regardless of the barriers that were put in front of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think his place in science is well, I think when you think of him as a grand term of the people that came before him, I think he should be up there in the end with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we was talking about how scientific principles, the move with each other, and that you take ideas from one to another. And if you go back to Galileo, then there's obviously Einstein, and then the people that are around now is people moving the physics in a term forward. Yeah.
Like I say, Galileo, I can understand why. With his, I mean, he's an idol of mine. Ultimately, I think fundamentally, I love Einstein. Is just, I think the way. Maybe it's media influence over him or whatever. I don't know, but no, Galileo he basically initiated the scientific method. That we must, if you have an idea, you have to test it. So, in fact, my absolute favourite scientist of all is Richard Feynman.
Okay.
What a character! What a guy!
Yeah.
Absolutely, he could convey science so much better than anyone I've ever watched before. And,
so a humanisation of science.
With Richard
Feynman.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He'd word it in such. I watched all his videos and what have you, and God, I wish I could have met the guy. If like age-old question, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world for an hour, dead or alive or to come, it'd be Richard Feynman.
Why do you think that is? Because it'd get you to a place.
No, not because he'll get me somewhere. Just because he's a genuinely interesting guy, and just be able to talk to someone like that, it just fill myself with awe, you know, and the way he explained ideas, and you know, I've read his books. Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, the series, and it's incredible. His life is like it's every person's dream for someone like me. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's wondrous, and it's a shame we don't all think like that in a way. But the world would be boring and it'd be religious. But going back to the point, what was the point?
We just talk about Stephen Hawking's career and
that's
his
right.
progression.
Galileo, Galileo says, if you have an idea, you've got to test it. You know, and if your experiment disagrees with your idea, then that idea goes. You don't then try and worm your way around the idea.
No.
To try and find some other explanation. That's not how it works. You know, if your idea doesn't work, just throw it out. Bring a new idea in.
Yeah.
There you go. And that's fundamentally what Galileo got started.
Yeah. Why didn't that thing work like I thought it was going to?
Yeah. Exactly. Absolutely. And I think a lot of there's been many more people than Galileo or civilizations, like the Greeks. If it wasn't for what happened with them being wiped out, I think would be a hell of a lot. Like I think what's his name? Archimedes. Some of the books that scientists are looking into how his mathematics and what have you. He had foundations for calculus in there. And calculus, what Newton developed, or Leibniz, whoever you want to have that argument with. Let's just stay simple and say it was Newton. I think they both developed them from different ways. But calculus is what has basically taken us from being earthbound people to the moon, to sending satellites to the outer reaches of the solar system and beyond. And I think that so I can understand why Hawkins
loves him so much.
He developed the scientific method in a way. And
I think that goes back into my point about him saying about the minds back then as well. I think what it is how they had basics around them, but their ideas were grander than the new at the time.
Yeah.
And
they were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people say they were, but someone's got to be, otherwise that time will never come around.
Yeah.
and it's just this constant progression all the way up to Stephen Hawking's.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and now people who are taking his work and taking it further, and I think it's always I can't remember who said it, but innovation doesn't come until the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So no one accepted Einstein's ideas because they were so radical. They were so different to what everyone had been used to.
Ice cream.
I don't want ice cream. So the ideas were new, and scientists at the same time, maybe a generation above Einstein, rejected it or didn't like it, said there's something wrong here. And then the younger generation below Einstein grow up learning about them ideas and understand that, that's how the universe works. So they then develop on Einstein's ideas. That's why it's always young scientists who make the big discoveries, the innovations, because they've not got that heavily into the physics or the science that they know you can't do that. Well, why can't I do that? Do you know what I mean? So they've just gone ahead and done it, and they've solved the problem.
Yeah.
So that's why it tends to be the younger generation that make these advances, because we're human. We get stuck with our own biases.
I think it's funny that those outliers as well. They're known as like they're almost like fundamentalist scientists, where they're like laughed at when they first come up with the ideas, and then ultimately.
Yeah, and this is something you've got to be careful of. Because people, if someone has an idea and it's a quack idea, and then they turn around and say, well, look at Einstein, everyone rejected his ideas to begin with. Yeah, but Einstein's idea made predictions. As we're going back full circle. Does your idea make a prediction?
Yeah.
Now, it's not that no one wants to listen to you, it's that you're trying to shove it down the throat and say, look at my idea, how fantastic. Okay, publish your paper, get it peer reviewed, demonstrate experimentally that your idea works, and then go on to win yourself a Nobel Prize. I think that's the core idea of if you've got an idea. It's not me, it's not you, it's not Joe Bloggs down the street. You need to convince. It's the scientific consensus.
Yeah.
You need to convince the people who are studying in that field, the experts, if you like, in that field, and get them to believe your idea. And
I think the danger is that there's always a human element as well, isn't there?
Always. So, but that's the joy of science. It's a self-correcting process.
Yeah.
If you're going to like I say, it's a self-correcting. So if you develop an experiment and you get Z results, someone will be able to take your paper and
disprove it.
Yeah, maybe improve it. First, what I'd say is, if there's an experiment out there and you'd want to, you first have to replicate it.
Yeah.
So you make sure you get the same results as what they got, because if they differ, then there's something wrong somewhere. And then usually, if you replicated that result and you get the same answer and you have another idea, you can build on that, and then you publish your paper. These findings from Derek we've now built on it, and we have a better understanding now. I think sometimes businesses can get in the way of that, because someone publishes an idea, right? Okay, now it takes time and resources to redo that experiment. So companies don't want to do that. They want to publish and get the results out, and you do your next experiment on it without validating the experiment you're building your idea on.
Yeah.
And this is where we get into something like cargo cult science, and it starts becoming, you start murking the water. But eventually, it might take 20 years, 50 years. If an idea is persisting through science, and this idea is wrong and it's incorrect, science will eventually weed it out. So I think, going back to the topic of evolution, there was a famous case of Piltdown Man, I think that's the right term, of someone who basically took the part of the skull of an ape, the part of the skull of a human, stuck them together, said, oh, here's the missing link. And that was very quickly shown to be fraud. You know, scientists, you know, to begin with, you got fame and this, that, and you got big reputation, but now you got shunned out of the community. You know, science. If you go ahead and lie, you get any paper you publish after that will be met with criticism, left, right, and centre. You've just wiped your name out of the scientific pool, if you like.
Yeah.
Because you fraudulently went ahead and did something like that. People make genuine mistakes, and science is there again to correct that. Them errors. And but I think, like I say, going back to Stephen Hawkins, he pushed this idea of science and the importance of science education in general.
I know that obviously there's a lot of, because science has a human side, there's a lot of bigotry there must be a lot of bigotry where if you have a radical idea, sometimes because those ideas are so far ahead of what we have to prove what you're saying, sometimes it's years, you wait years for technology to meet your ideas, and
burden of proof.
And there was a thing with the Hadron Collider where they was waiting for
the Higgs boson,
the boson particle. We spoke about Einstein earlier, was waiting for the right powered telescope to prove what he was saying. And it's years later from his work that he finally got validated.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the act of measurement again. Going back to that, and it's a fascinating story, the act of measurement and how it was defined. It used to be like royals, whoever's in power, it would be like from the tip of their finger to their elbow, and that would be the unit of measure. That would be the meter, if you like. But now that's all gone, and we have the standard meter, which is so many wavelengths of a certain wavelength of light in a certain amount of time, how far it travels. That's the standard meter now. And how we got from that to where we are now, phenomenal story.
I keep harping back to Einstein, but it's just because you was talking about measurement, and then you was talking about how the guy had fudged his ideas, and I know Einstein was accused of fudging some of his maths, wasn't he, at one point?
I don't know. I'm not aware. Was he? I'm not sure. I think yes, he fudged the maths, but only to me. Yeah, and this is the thing.
I'm not calling the guy out. I'm just saying.
No, you're right,
obviously.
You're right. No, he introduced into his equation something called the cosmological constant. So at the time, the evidence says that the universe is static. Yeah. It's not changing. His equations predicted that the universe should be expanding. I think it was actually a Catholic priest who I can't remember, Lemaitre or something, who used Einstein's equations to predict that there was a beginning. But Einstein said that's great, clever mathematics and what have you. So Einstein went away, and 3 years later, after he published his original general theory of relativity, he then published his revised, which involved
a change,
cosmological constant. And then later on, Hubble made the discovery that in fact galaxies are moving away from each other, and the universe is expanding. And then Einstein famously said it's his biggest blunder, and he don't know why, he just didn't follow the maths. And that's coming full circle, like how important is maths. That's one of the key reasons now in theoretical physics why maths is important, because science used to be like a jumble with philosophy and thinking of how the world works, but quantum mechanics and general relativity doesn't come natural to us. We didn't evolve on the plains of savannah to recognise the cosmic microwave background radiation jumping out. If it was attacking us, we'd know full well what it looked like, and if subatomic particles caused us to die, we'd know how to avoid such and such to survive. But we don't. That's why partly why we're superstitious as well. Because we recognise patterns that aren't there. But that's a survival mechanism in my eyes, and we don't really need it this day and age. But it comes in handy for recognising patterns that are real as well. So
you remind me. You was talking about you was talking about evolution with Darwin earlier, and I was thinking about when you was talking about the skulls. and he's another non. Obviously, you don't deal. Well, maybe you do. Well, yeah, you do work with math in biology, but he's one that was a studier first, where a lot of these scientists that you're bringing up.
Yeah, there's no maths in the origin of species. I've not read it myself, so I can't really claim.
Modern day biology is to do with science, though, isn't it? The fields, yeah. So, but moving on to that point is, I wanted to bring up his love, his first fascination, and the building blocks for his fundamental book that everybody turns to. Is that he had a love of studying beetles, and I think it was beetles and moths he'd studied, and he took one species and he thought, why does that look so much like this species, but it has a slight difference? And then he was thinking, like, well, something's caused that slight difference, that change in that species, but they look the same, so they must come from something of the same.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the famous examples that most people would know is the finches, Darwin's finches, and the Galapagos Islands, where on each island it was the same bird, finches, but they had different beaks or different claws. And to be fair, I have a love for physics the most, but out of all science, his idea of natural selection is the most simple, elegant idea I know. I think it just explains so much with just one concept. And no, it doesn't explain the origin of life, but when life got going, it explains everything after. And like you say, and it's just a simple idea of, if you're on one island and the food source is worms, you might need a long beak to get into the hole to pick it behind the bark or from the soil, so you need a long beak to get in there to pick it out. But if you live on the other island where nuts are more abundant, you want a strong, thick jaw to crack that nut open. And so each generation that has, egg hatchlings hatch and one has a slightly bigger beak, it's going to
survive longer. It's
going to get more food, more nutrition, and it's going to have more chance of mating, or mating multiple times. And that's a fantastic thing. And I think it's sometimes it makes me, it infuriates me, but it is what it is. Is when people say silly things like, well, if evolution's real and we come from monkeys and there's still monkeys around, then why are there still monkeys? No, that's not how evolution works. We have a common ancestor with monkeys, which we both, like you're saying with the beetles. So if you look at the skeletal system, it's pretty much very similar to a whale or to a monkey, and and as you go further back, you can see how these different things diverged, and it makes it's so simple and elegant.
It's silly to say anyway, because if you think about it, the ape is perfectly evolved for its surroundings, isn't it? So it's just as much evolved as...
You say perfectly. It's evolved to meet the demands of its environment.
Yeah, at the moment, at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it took a while to explain to yourself, actually, like, some people say we're more evolved than the next species. No, we're evolved to meet the demands of our environment. We now shape our environment, because at the time when we were evolving bigger brains, that become more handy, but we're not more evolved than a beetle. Beetle's perfectly adapted to its environment.
But it's the term, isn't it? It's the term that's different. So I'd still think that most people would say that a human's more evolved than an ape.
It doesn't make sense. To me, to say that is to say that evolution has an end goal. It's not. It's just a process that happens to ensure that your genetics gets passed on. To say that you're for some reason, it gives it like an agency. It's not. It's just, it could have gone another way, where consciousness never evolved and we weren't, humans weren't around, and the plains of savannah still how it was, a few 100,000 years ago without humans. Do you know what I mean? Like, intelligence may never have arose. It's just the fact that it has, coincidentally. But it doesn't mean we're more evolved than other species. And I think that's. I mean, maybe I'm getting it wrong, but I don't think I am.
The thing is, it's when you look at the chart, isn't it? You put the chart, and there's like a famous chart of an ape growing into a man.
Yeah, and that was a misconception again. That shouldn't be followed, because I think that is where that misconception comes from. The way it should be is all these different levels should then go to a single point that way, not that way, or go to a point where they all evolved from. Now, when they're all on the same level, they've all reached where we are now, and the actual diagram of evolution is actually a circle, and we all branch off. But there's no one species that's above the other. Do you know what I mean? They may be linked to an extinct species, but let's say we have a common ancestor with apes. Now, that common ancestor, whatever species it might be, might still look exactly like gorillas do, because let's say it never left its environment, so there's no need for it to change. I mean, it's highly unlikely that it wouldn't change, because the smallest changes over a few 100,000 years mount up to a big change. So I mean, that idea.
Do you not think it's an evolution above an ape to develop a brain, though? Develop consciousness, sentience? It's
more advanced in a way, as we say it.
Because I mean, it makes us
different.
Top of the food chain, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it's still at the same time. It only takes a bacteria that we can't tackle to kill you. You know, something you can't even see.
Let's say that did happen.
How unevolved is that? And
let's say that did happen, and it wiped
sort of way.
And it wiped humanity out. Then you
you
correct in a way, because if those apes are still around, or whatever the thing is, they survived because their nature was adapted to the bacteria or what have you.
Yeah.
So you're right. I understand 100% what you're saying in principle.
Yeah.
And I understand the evolutionary principle. It's hard to get that idea out of your head that we're not.
I think as humans, we're storytellers, and we like to be the star of the stories. And, I think like let's take a grand conspiracy, like the Princess Diana. You know, people don't like. She's a princess. She's an extraordinary woman, and she did a lot for whatever. And people have this idea of her being a woman of high stature, if you like. For her to just be simply killed in a car accident, it's not good enough for people. So people develop stories like, oh, she was plotted to be killed because of this and this. I don't really fully. They just go wild. They say what they want, and I think that mainly comes from a thing that people want to have this love story of humanity, and that's fine, but it's wrong. And I just think it's important to remain in contact with reality in a way.
See, I think I'd say that developing sentience is. That's where we differ. I think that is a.
I'm not saying it's not. It's not. The thing is, we don't know. We don't know. I think it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. I watched one of his videos once, and we have 1.8% or 1.6% difference in genetics to a chimpanzee, and that's all the difference is that 1.6% difference between us and them. And we can fly to the moon, or travel to the moon. And then he was saying if an alien race was to come to Earth and they had an extra 1.8% on top of us of development, then think of what they could do. They'd look at us like we're monkeys, chimpanzees. So in intelligence, that's just how our genetics has wired us. They've wired us to be intelligent in X domain. There's so many different types of intelligence. When you look at crows, they work things out. They use tools to get to food. That's a sign of intelligence.
Yeah.
So it depends what intelligence. Dolphins, you know, just maybe it's this that separates us. You know, being able to use the deposit.
You don't know what's in an animal's mind either, do you? There's a lot of people that claim to know.
Yeah, that's like I say, we don't even know what it's in our own mind.
So. No, yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true. But a lot of people claim to know, but how would you know that? How would you measure that? What an animal is thinking? A lot of people say, well, that sets us apart from an animal because.
Well, yeah, this comes onto a theory of mind. Now, I think there's a famous experiment with monkeys. We know. You know that I've got my own mind, and I know you've got your own mind, as small as it may be. No, so, and we, this is going into psychology and some psychology I'm quite unfamiliar with. But yeah, we have this, but we can't do it with animals because, well, we can't talk to an animal for one. And I'm not saying dogs go around talking to each other. Well, not saying that, or like they build social groups, so, and that's, to me, that's a form of intelligence. You look at wolves; they hunt together. They communicate. They plan to take down a gazelle or whatever their food source is. The buffalo is it. So to me, that's a sign of intelligence. Now, it's not intelligence in the way we have it. I mean, we can do that, but
with a lot of people that say it's from an animal, it's instinctual. Everything they work on instincts, and I don't think that's true. When you watch a group of, we was talking about, let's stay on gorillas or on apes, great apes. Yeah. If you watch a family, if an ape dies, you can see.
They mourn.
Yeah,
they mourn,
that it affects the whole group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's there. You shouldn't say a human aspect. That's arrogant to say a human aspect. But
yeah, absolutely.
In the best terms we can understand, that's a humanistic trait.
But that's we have empathy. So we project our feelings onto, and that's why we say that's human-like, because we project our emotions onto an ape or a dog.
You can understand it there.
When a dog's wagging its tail, you don't know it's happy to see you. It might actually be really annoyed with you. It's just its genetics telling it to wag its tail when it sees a human. But like you say, we don't know what an animal's thinking. And like I say, I'm not. Like I say, I can't claim that's correct. I don't know. It's not. It's nothing. Like I say, I'm an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
Doing a job which involves mechanical engineering. So in a way, like you say, we could use the analogy of being an engineer. When I'm designing something, I want to make it efficient, cost effective. Think about different aspects of a design, how it's going to fit together, how is someone going to be able to make that? And then you look at the human body, and you see all its imperfections. Now, if I was designing the human body, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I'm not saying I could design a human body. It's way more complex than anything I put together. But if it's the common one is the larynx nerve. I don't think I'm pronouncing that correct. It's a nerve that goes from the brain to the voice box. It's allowing us to talk. But it goes from my brain and it goes round the heart and then back up to the voice box. That doesn't seem big to us, but as Richard Dawkins says, in a giraffe, that's a long way to go.
Yeah.
Now, that stems from the fish. Now, the fish, I can't remember exactly what it is to do with a fish, but because we can all trace our ancestry back to a fish, that nerve in fish is actually something to do with that area down here. As it's evolved, you can't undo evolution. You can't say, let's just delete that and let's make it this way. It's an additive process. And that's why once the nerve's gone round, it's found an alternative purpose now, which is a voice box in our case.
Speech.
Yeah, speech. You can't just, evolution can't just come along and say, we'll undo that and then make it straight there. Do you know what I mean? It's not efficient. So, in that case, from my engineering background, doesn't. Why would an engine all? We're going back to Superman, that side of things. But why would someone engineer it inefficiently? Inefficiently, I guess.
I thought I went there in my head as well because it immediately made me think of being back at school, and I remember we had a principal come in and we was all sat down. You have your assemblies, obviously everybody knows, but we had a guy and he came and he was talking about the universe, and I was talking about scientific principles, and then
I can't remember this.
the first thing he said was, because he came from a religious standpoint, was think of how your day works each day you get up, and think about what you see, and think about what you communicate with, what you come in contact with. And then he was like, think of a watch. Yeah, and obviously the jump that everybody goes to is obviously, look at how well that watch is engineered. Look at how well that watch has been designed to work in that way. And that's a nice aspect that you was talking about when you was talking about the nerve. That's a really nice segue into it. That it's not actually, because it works so perfectly, you think, wow, that must have been set in that way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But then when you put it in terms of that it's come from a really small bacteria into fish, into something that's come out of the sea, and then you think, well, that's not that well engineered, is it? Do you know? It's
no. Well, it's like I say, survival of the fittest has been the term that got thrown around. But I like what Bill Nye says. It's the survival of the just good enough.
Yeah.
If you're good enough just to survive and pass your genetics on, you've made it. You've made it. There you go. So
again, I'm not saying that's a science versus religion thing. I'm just saying what I was told when I was younger.
Like I said, I try not to. If someone wants to talk to me about religion or supernatural things, I tend to try to stay away from science, because science has nothing to do with that. Like I explained earlier, science is only concerned with what we can measure. If you can't measure it, then I don't want to bring it into. Okay.
You can see how that's
come up with ideas of how you're going to measure it. That's the question.
You can see how that's an idea that somebody could easily fall into, though, because to our every day we get up, we get in his cars. You know, this car was designed like we're getting up, we're eating breakfast, so absolutely. Everything's working perfect, but it's not necessarily the way that it looks, is it?
No, absolutely not. And
I think
that I always forget the argument against, it's the watchmaker's argument into or painting was painted. Thing is, you don't find a watch was manufactured because we have experience of seeing people making them or designing them. To then say a tree was designed, we would see someone design a tree. You can't make that leap. You can't make that distinction. We have ideas, the evolution of how that tree got there, and how it evolved from single-celled organisms to what it is today. So we have ideas of how this tree got here, but I don't want to go down the route of saying it's silly, because people want to believe all sorts of lovely ideas, but if they disagree with experiment and observation, it's not science. It remains in another classroom. And I think that's it's important to realise that reality doesn't care what you believe, and only because it helps us develop science and look at what science has done for us so far. So if you want to neglect evolution, that's fine. Are you also going to neglect antibiotics when you get a high fever? Because the thing is, at the moment we're understanding we're getting superbugs, which are becoming resistant to antibiotics because we threw antibiotics around. So bacteria are now evolving, adapting to
well, it should be evolution again, wouldn't it? It's that they're surviving.
Yeah, it is evolution.
Yeah, the ones that don't survive, that survive it because they have a slight difference to the last bacteria.
Yeah, absolutely.
They breed strains, and that carries on just the same.
Absolutely, and so they're now meeting a new environment, and they're meeting the demands to stay alive, to pass their genetics on, and. Now, if you want to disregard evolution, but somehow say Like you're contradicting yourself because I'm not a biologist, and like I said, I'm an engineer, so whether I have any grounds to say anything, but it's a hobby of mine, so I'd like to think I do have some information I can give. If you deny a well-known idea, a documented idea, our species isn't going to progress anymore.
No.
If you're gonna accept all the science but reject this one idea because you don't like it, and most of the time that idea is evolution because of religion, because people want to believe they're created and they've got this special purpose in life, which is fine. But
so that goes back into what I was saying, doesn't it? That obviously because you're getting up, you think, I was designed to do this. I was designed to because it works so well. And
and I think it's a if you start thinking like that, you're gonna think, well, I was made to go and do this job instead of going out and doing the job you want, you love. Because you fall into this, trap of that. I mean, at the moment, I'm really wanting to do a degree in physics. What's stopping me is the cost. I mean, I can't take a student loan out because I've already got a degree, which fortunately my company paid for. So I'm very fortunate in that respect, and I'm very happy to have the knowledge I've gained from that.
Big shout out for them big companies.
Absolutely. Not all of them, but they did. Yeah, Bombardier have done right by me. Like I say, they also have. Well, that's big companies in general. Anyway.
Well, you was going to go into agendas then, weren't you? Let's stay away from that.
Yeah, stay away from that. Stay away from that. We're not politics here. We're talking science, which is facts, and we can.
Well, they might run hand in hand with each other soon. Talking about environmental.
Political views are skewing. You see, climate change.
It's a biggie at the moment.
Absolutely, and if you're going to say climate change isn't real, then you carry on pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, and we'll just mess it up for the next generation. I'm
going to say in the podcast, I'm going to drop all the links to everything that we spoke about, because there's a little Brian Cox debate I want to throw into this exact
Q&A.
Yes, where you have some politician trying to skew a certain way, and we'll talk about that.
And like I say, that I don't want to talk about say political. I can't understand why politicians are denying science.
Have you seen that when he gets?
He gets very angry.
Gets the graph out and he's like, "Let me show you the graph."
That's it, absolutely. And the thing is,
look at the paper.
These graphs aren't made up. You got a politician who's influencing people. I don't think he's actually a politician anymore. I think he's been kicked out for some other thing, some other view. But
look at this graph.
These graphs. They were.
Look at these lines on this paper.
But they were made from observations and experimentations, and observations mainly. Right, here we go. The planet's warming up, and it's carried on doing that. Okay, and then people, and it's another silly argument, like the whole if we come from monkeys, why they're still monkeys. Someone goes outside, and this actually happened. It was snowing wherever in America, and a politician walked in with a snowball and go, global warming.
Yeah.
And you think, well, you don't understand what you're talking about. That's the weather. The weather's a daily thing. We're talking about the climate as a whole. That's why I think we've gone from the word global warming to climate change. Because it's how the climate's being affected as a whole, and we're going to see more radical changes to the weather. It was snowing in March. Now, I'm not going to definitively say that's to climate change, but it's abnormal in my experience. And
so you do, though, you look at links, you say, what, that's part of science. You say, why is that happening? That's a freak thing that's happening. Why is it
exactly
that's happened?
Yeah, and you can trace it all the way back. I mean, you can just say, it was the weather of that day, but then or what's the bigger picture? How is the weather being affected globally? And that's the idea behind climate change. And CO2 is obviously a greenhouse gas. It traps heat in. and we're pumping that into the atmosphere like there's no tomorrow. The sea can no longer absorb any more CO2, so where's it going to go? We're cutting down rainforest, so that's more CO2 that's not being absorbed. It's going to linger about in the atmosphere where the heat radiation from the sun is going to start heating it, or come into the Earth's atmosphere. The heat's just going to stay contained. And it's
scary, isn't it?
It's very scary, and
what it is it's not a big enough change for them every day, and that's why they don't want to make a.
We remain optimistic.
Yeah.
We're short-sighted. We're reactive. We're not proactive as a species, I think.
If you look at most modern science today, it's scarily warnings towards what are we doing to our planet, and that's a big worry for a lot of people.
Some people say, well, we'll just move to Mars. I like that idea. We should branch out. Let's travel to Mars and colonise it. But I can't remember who said it. But if we have the power to, what's it called when you make a planet? What they do in the Superman film?
I forgot what it's called. Geoforming, is it?
Something like something like that. I think yeah. But if you have the power to do that to Mars, you have the power to do it to this planet. And I think we need to start acting now.
Well, if we can't even save the base planet, what hope have you got for moving on? And is it that we're just gonna be like a disease and just keep damaging planets and moving? That's not
or the disease we're creating is going to kill us to begin with. So it's all a conspiracy made up by China anyway.
What I think
the American economy.
What I think the biggest shame with that is that if it is that, and we're just like predators and we just keep moving on and damaging planets and moving on, is that the planet, the organisms that aren't us, they can't look after themselves. They can't. The survival of the fittest, that's fair enough, but we're an element, we know what we're doing in terms of destruction, but we just keep doing it anyway.
Because currently we're going through a mass extinction.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So
yeah. We just lost. Somebody told me.
Rhinos.
Yeah, we just lost a white rhino. That's from pure.
Well, that's from poaching.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And people's ridiculous ideas of Chinese medicine, and
but
this is another thing, alternative medicine. Which is
it's not just that though, they don't understand sustainability. So if that rhino, let's say that their theory is right and that medicine it'll cure cancer, that medicine or whatever they use it for, whatever they're saying it's used for. Let's say it is right. I mean, let's be honest, it's not. But let's say that let's say it's right, that you still have to take into account sustainability. That rhino's gone now. So where was the fourth idea that once that rhino's gone, where would we get that medicine from?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's what I mean. That's not a.
If it did work, there'd probably be more of an emphasis to breed them. Or what you would do, you do what science does. You take that horn, and you isolate all the components within that horn or whatever, and you see which component cures. Whatever you're claiming it cures. And then when you found that component, you package it up as a pill, and there you go. You know what I mean? That's how medicine works. Like I say, I don't know much about medicine again, but from if you're claiming a certain plant will cure your cancer, science most likely we'll find out if that's true or not. And people claim people are covering up the truth, and now some let's say some alternative medicines might work for certain conditions, and then it's up to the person distributing that to go ahead and prove that it's curing that, not just using anecdotal evidence. Do you know what anecdotal evidence is? Basically, it worked for me.
Yeah.
And if you get many people saying, "Oh, it worked for me," then
There's a link in that as well, isn't there? That it's mind over matter sometimes as well. That
and you get the placebo effect, and I think one thing from what the medical industry could do better that normally you find alternative practitioners do is they spend time with the patient. They show that they care. Where they're always in a rush.
Yeah.
Always in a rush.
Yeah. Well, it's a numbers game for a doctor, isn't it? I save 5, I lose this many.
It's that.
It's brutal, but it's the case, isn't it?
It's down to economic pressures, funding cuts, but we're not going down our agenda route.
Well, I was going to say, like, we was talking about climate change. Part of it is a human element in that how do you turn around... I watched a documentary about... There's parts of the forest that are saved, so they are funded, and that part of the forest can't be touched.
Yeah.
And they have hands to help keep that forest safe, cultivate that forest. And sometimes it showed you this documentary. Sometimes the hands, there's a human element where they're chopping trees down because it's their livelihood. That it's the only in the parts where they're trying to save the forest, it's poor, where there's a lot of people dying, you see a lot of sickness. And that human side, it's hard to battle and say, well, that's pure ignorance. The rhino horn, that's pure ignorance, because they think that medicine will save them. They think that bit of money, I planted 5 trees, I've just chopped one down, what's the harm? But there is harm, but how can you battle it? That's the tricky thing.
Like going back to the rhinos, I don't know if these poachers even know what they're getting the horns for. They know they're going to get money for it.
Yeah.
So then they can feed themselves and
feed the families. That's the big thing, isn't it?
Or go do whatever they want to do. Yeah. And so you can see the human need. It's just survival. But that's where it's down to us as a species and the whole is to make sure we teach the right ideas. And so the simple thing there is to try and teach the population that it doesn't work. But you ain't going to change a nation overnight, and this is why politics. I enjoy politics. I enjoy a good debate on it, but it's not something. Not something I know a great deal about, and I should do. And I think fundamentally, education needs to be revised. There needs to be more critical thinking and more emphasis on science and mathematics and English and your core subjects of and art and also religious studies, but
to develop a well-rounded mind.
An open mind.
Yeah.
I've been accused in the past of being closed-minded. Which, it could be a fair statement sometimes because I do get quite.
I think I've accused of you.
Yeah, I think because I get ambitious about the scientific idea. But the thing is, if you show me evidence to support the claim that you're trying to tell me, then I've changed my mind in an instant.
That's why I don't think that there's a place. When I said earlier, I don't think that there's a place for an argument between science and religion. I don't think they should be used to butt heads.
No.
I think that my biggest reasoning for that is that you're talking about a belief system versus it's kind of an unfair. If you look at it in as plain and simple terms, it's an unfair battle because, like you said, science is very much, can you prove it? This is my way of thinking. This is what we think, but then here's my math to prove it. If you say to a religious person, why do you think that? Because you've got a feeling about God? Because
it's faith.
Yeah, it's on faith. Yeah, it's a belief system. So it's very difficult to say, right, well, I've got this proof, but where's your proof? That's what it comes down to, and it leaves the religious people in a place where they're trying to. For a start, you're trying to think of religion on the terms of science, and it never really is it? When you think about what religion is,
I think to me, and obviously this answer might not be correct. Religion was an early attempt to explain the world we live in. I think I've heard many people say that, But I agree with that statement. Like, we're looking to see how the world works, and religion makes an early attempt at trying to answer that. Science does a better job, because when you have a religious idea, you're refusing to change your mind. It's the idea of claims.
Yeah.
What claim you make. I could claim to you. I could turn around to you and say, I bought a new microwave the other day. It's a reasonably perfect claim. If you told me you bought a new microwave, that's great, brilliant, I don't care. But, no, but you know what I mean. I believe you. I believe you. But if you rang me up and say, "Oh mate, I've got an atomic bomb in my garden," I'd want to see that for evidence.
I think that goes back to, you once said to me, "Well, what's your best guess?" Didn't you? Do you remember? You was talking about. You said like how people are, the fall in categories. We don't like to categorize people, but if you're going to call an atheist, it's categorization.
Yeah.
You have your agnostics and then you have your believers. If you're an agnostic, what's your best guess? I think Ricky Gervais might have said it as well.
Yeah,
I think that's where you've said it from.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
It's like, which is your best guess either side? Do you know what I mean? If you're sitting on the fence, what you best think? Like,
absolutely. If you're an agnostic, it's an interesting position because you're sat on the fence and you say, right, you're agnostic about God.
Yeah.
Which God? They don't know which God. They just say, okay, they're agnostic about a supreme being of some sort. So, is that all 1,000 versions of that supreme being, or just a supreme being in general? And I mean, I suppose.
I mean, if you're a true scientist, if you are actually a true scientist, you're closer to an agnostic than you are an atheist, aren't you? In a way.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, give me a proof, and I'll believe you. If we measure it, it's right. I believe you. So really. You, as a scientist, you're closer to a middle ground than you are, because you're always waiting to be disproved, aren't you?
But the term atheist is just, like I say, if you tell me you believe in X God, and I'd ask you to show me the evidence, and you can't show me the evidence, I said, well, I don't believe you. Therefore, atheist against that God.
Yeah.
So I don't believe your claim about that God is real. And that applies to pretty much every single idea of what a God is, to me. Anyway. That's why I would be put in the category of an atheist. Now, fundamentally, I put in the category of agnosticism because I don't know. And I don't claim to know. I don't claim not to know. I don't know if there's not a supreme being. But then
I think someone asked Brian Cox once, and he said, "I don't care."
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It was like, if you show me, then I'll believe you. But until then, I don't really care because I like the natural world around me. Absolutely. That's more important.
I agree with that. I mean, it's so beautiful once you get into it and all how reality works.
Well, there's a part of it that if you, let's say we coin the phrase agnostic. Let's say you're agnostic. You've got to think, how lucky am I?
Yeah.
When you think of, because there's an idea of the universe at the moment, this chaotic universe, that you're a 1%. How lucky are you? That we are. And I know I watched something with Brian Cox, and he was talking about how important is life as we know it. And he was saying it could be infinitely important because going back to, you was talking about Feynman, atoms contemplating atoms, when that might be something that's never happened before or never will happen again.
Yeah, it could be.
And if we don't survive, then that could be a rarity where that never happens again in our universe, or never does happen again. If you think about the multiverse theory, maybe that's true, and we're the only species, we're the only thing that created life as we know it. How important that might be in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
is incredible. Of
course. Or it could just be, the universe is built this way.
Yeah.
and it's.
We might not be rare.
Built in a way, yeah, it might not be rare. Yeah. But also, it's the universe is clearly able to sustain life. Now, there's an argument, and it's like, obviously everything's perfectly made for us to survive. But if you think about it, 99.9999999% of the universe is inhospitable to human beings.
Yeah.
We have this nice, lovely area around the circumference of the Earth where we can survive, and we can survive in like more extreme places because of the technology we can move there. And that's on Earth alone. Most places we can live underwater without the gear. So no, the universe isn't really, in my eyes, designed to
sustain life.
Just for us, to sustain life, just for us, because.
There's a flip side to that argument, though. That's the trouble with it. What do you mean? That having that point of view is flawed in its own sense. I'm not saying that idea is flawed from you. I'm just saying that because as soon as you say an idea like that, it's very easy for a religious person. I don't want to. It's very categorizing, but somebody from a religious background could say, because I thought of it when you was talking, them saying, well, doesn't that prove that there's a mindset? Doesn't that prove that if we're that perfect Earth, why is that's that perfect Earth among the universe?
Yes, but that's only because we're the only planet or the only example of life that we know of. So we only know that life is here on Earth. It's extremely arrogant of us to say life can't be anywhere else.
Massively, yeah.
And when you look at the size of the universe, I see it highly improbable that there won't be life out there. On whatever level it might be, whether it's bacterial form, I'd imagine that life is out there. I'm not claiming there is life. I'd wager a good guess that there is other life out there. And then
even more than that, to expand on that, if say M theory is correct, then you're multiplying that by.
Well, you're going into the multiverse thing. Yeah. And that, again, if that is true, we don't know. We don't know if it is.
But let's say that we're that one in that universe. If you're talking about M theory, then there could be countless of that one.
Yeah.
Of those universes.
Here, the opposite way around.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Or exactly the same position. And
superposition.
Yeah. The many worlds theory, and these are ideas coming from science, following the maths.
Yeah.
And that's they're following the maths at the moment with string theory. It's following the mathematics, and it goes down to this cosmic tuning that each constant in nature is finely tuned. But if there's an infinite amount of universes, you're gonna find a universe that's finely calibrated to them settings, if you like. But of course, we don't know that. I mean, fundamentally, we could all be a brain in a vat, in a jar, being fed electrical impulses. But I'm not going to live my life on that assumption.
Yeah.
To me, I'm enjoying life. I look at the world and it's wondrous, and I hope that someone who is, doesn't have that same joy, has their own joys in their own way, and I hope they're just not wasting their life. And when you see people who aren't happy, want to cause violence and stuff, that's not a way to live. But no one wants to do that. We're past that.
Just as much as if you get people on the edge and they're searching for something, that they might self-destruct, they might kill themselves or what have you.
Yeah.
And then they find something that keeps them going.
Yeah, absolutely. Because religion brings joy to a lot of people, and I don't want to take it away from them.
I'm not gonna splay the argument. So we've got like an atheist agnostic sitting across from me, but I fall into a spiritual category. So I'm not shaking it. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah.
I think you're right in terms of science. When you talk about science, I'd rather go and fall in that side and because the natural world around us is measured in science, and I think that's a beautiful thing in itself. That's why I say I don't feel like it's annoying that it's even come up, actually, because you don't want to talk about it, but it's like an elephant in the room, isn't it? Like it's how people, I don't know what it is in us. Yeah, it's something in humans where they're like, well, which side of the coin do you lie? It's like it's because I think it's because by nature we want to know where we started from. Even in science, in scientific terms, we want to know where that beginning point was.
Of course it is, absolutely.
And where it'll ultimately end. And that's just something human where we want to know. And
I absolutely agree.
I think that's why it always does jump to that, and why the verses each other. But like I said before, I don't think it necessarily should be that.
But like I say, I think it the only reason I get my back up is when people deny the evidence. You're not sitting across to me saying evolution doesn't exist.
Yeah, always talking earlier, wasn't we, about flat earthers?
The other day. Absolutely. And what an extraordinary view. And it clearly shows a deficiency in our educational system because it's on the rise. And it's crazy that because a lot of people podcasts that I listen to or videos I watch on skepticism or science, and these questions are now being tackled by science. It's wasting their time. It's not wasting their time because we need to try and make sure this virus of the mind doesn't spread too much in a way.
But I think you're right. I think that's like a perfect analogy for it. I think that do you know there's some people in the world and they're so, because it's almost like if their idea is wrong, it's an attack on them, and it's like they can't get into their mind that what you're telling them could be true. So it's like there's always a block up straight away.
Yeah. Well, they turn it around. So they probably say to me, they probably say, I'm the one being blind. I'm the one who's sucking up the information from the big corporations like NASA or the Metropolitan or whatever, European International Space.
You're being fed ideas, is what you're talking about. Yeah,
I'm being indoctrinated, and it's but it's such a grand conspiracy. It's so fallible in so many ways, and you just have to watch a boat go over the horizon and disappear from the bottom.
Or get on a plane and fly around the world.
Yeah, you come back.
What do you think's happening? They think that the navigation's being messed with.
But we sit here and laugh about it, but they have an answer for everything. They will have an answer. So, for me, the concept of gravity.
So how did they think about the poles? Then
I think from my best knowledge, North Pole
for them,
the centre of a dinner plate, and then the South Pole isn't the pole, it's the edge, it's the rim. So like Game of Thrones. Okay. It's like an ice wall all the way around the edge of the planet.
Okay.
Can you call
this
it
is this is conceptual. This isn't Phil saying this is how it is.
Yeah. I'm not saying and I'm not going to claim to know their arguments. Okay. Because I don't care. Okay. Because I can do experiments that shows me the Earth is round.
Isn't it scary that there's people that think that though? Do you find that scary?
But it comes back to it's not me or you. They need to convince. It's the leading experts in the field of geology or physics. They need to convince them. They need to convince the scientific consensus. It's no good going around blabbing your mouth about this silly idea unless you can provide the evidence, the scientific evidence. And this is science is hard. It's hard. It is, and it takes a lot of work. And
well, I'm sitting here laughing about a concept, and it's just like it's being a bit of a bigot, isn't it? But it's bigot when you. It seems so ridiculous to us.
It does. It seems like the Greeks knew that the Earth was round. You know, Ptolemaeus, or I can't remember his name, stuck a stick in the ground on a certain day of the year, and he had his student or whatever go to another point up the Earth, and at the same time of the day, they measured the shadow of the stick. Now, on around Earth, as the sun's pointing here, it's going to be pointing more that way. So the shadow is going to be cast differently. So from that simple observation, you can deter. And also, when you see the shadow on the freaking moon, you can see it's round. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, but these ideas are.
Well, that to them, they'll just be like, "Oh, that's another disc."
Yeah,
that's another.
And
it's just their discs like that.
Yeah,
you know?
And we're being fed all this information, and we're brainwashed, and we're being a sheeple, and it's just it's laughable. It is laughable.
So I'm gonna
lack of education.
I'm gonna tie it back round because I think I got a bit of a cheat sheet and I wrote a load of dates down for. So back on point. Just to finally wrap it up, I just want to talk about some of the dates of these books that Stephen Hawking brought out, and then ultimately I want to lead you into a question. So there is what we got here. So what is it? Stephen Hawking's universe. So the Cosmos Explained. So he bought a series of documentaries and books out. Humanizing is a term we've thrown around. Humanizing science and trying to, because we're not all geniuses, we don't all understand the universe like these people that have been studying it for years.
I don't think they do.
Yeah, some of them, yeah.
That's why they look.
Yeah, but all of the subjects that we spoke about, we touched on politics, we touched on human errors, human aspects, and I think that ties into these books, these documentaries, and people like Stephen Hawking and Brian Cox, and he talked about Richard Feynman, how he simplified science, and how he was trying to get people to think of concepts or get out of spaces where they thought and move them on, and like you said, do it in simplistic terms so that you could understand it.
And I think that's what's excellent about these people like Stephen Hawking or Brian Cox and Richard Feynman. They had the understanding to then go ahead and do that. Like, it's all very well me saying all this, but all I've learned is from their books and from what they've shown in documentaries, and it's inspired me, and it's made me want to be to obtain more knowledge and more understanding about the universe, and spread my love for that to others. And I mean, I think it's Carl Sagan, another great preacher in science, if you like. Is preacher the right word? But he said, I can't remember what I was going to say now. That was it. When you're in love, you want to tell the world, and that's the feeling. I love science and skepticism and critical thinking. I want to spread these ideas because it opens up a view of the world that's different, and it opens up your mind, and it's. I'm not saying it. It's quite a deep feeling, to be fair. Quite a deep feeling.
How I think of it is that we spoke about
almost spiritual.
Yeah. No, you can say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not in terms of that's how, if someone's saying they feel an awe
for the universe,
science brings me that same sense of wondrous feeling. Like, let's take a phenomena like the aurora borealis, northern lights. Someone could just look at that and think, oh wow, that's pretty, look at it. We'll go back to Richard Feynman's statement about when he took some art lessons once, and his friend, the artist, says, if you look at this flower, the artist was saying, I see it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's got this colour, this shade, and this aspect, and it's amazing, but you as a scientist, you'll break it down and you'll tear it apart and you'll make it look ugly. And I agree with what Richard Feynman followed up with. He rightly so said, I see an inner beauty to it, I see how the molecules fit together, how the atomic atoms, how the sun reflects how the flower reflects ultraviolet light for bees to see, and so he sees more beauty because he's able to break it down further. And the Northern Lights, you're able to understand that you have polarized atoms being flung into the Earth's atmosphere, ionized particles into the Earth's atmosphere, which is reacting with the atmosphere, and it's then generating these green lights, you see.
So adding another layer of beauty to it.
Yeah,
because what you're saying is you don't understand how rare it is what you're seeing, or
yeah, exactly. So
because I know how rare it is, it makes it even more beautiful for me to look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
definitely.
I like that. I like that. That's a nice way of thinking it. Not quite. I'm just gonna ask you one last thing.
No problem.
So I was on about humanisation of science and how important it is. So it as a legacy that Stephen Hawking has left behind. So obviously he did his relativity terms when he was studying, and he obviously studied I forgot what it's called, like event horizons of black holes, singularities. And then obviously this theory of everything.
The unification of four fundamental forces. So
that side of it, how his legacy as a whole, from his starting point to where he's famously just brought. It submitted a paper that's
as he did for
just before his passing. I haven't seen it either, but still going. And a legacy that carries on. How important do you think he is ultimately to science?
Extremely important. You know, he presented new ideas which gave you a different way of looking at a black hole. So, like we say with a singularity, we don't know what's going on in the centre of a black hole, and that's why we call it a singularity. And like I say, the beginning of the universe is a singularity where, before the Big Bang, before inflation, we don't know. We don't. I think it's 10 to the minus 43 seconds after Big Bang, and then it all goes. We just have to put our hands up and say, I don't know what happens here. So I think Stephen, his legacy for developing his new ideas and making sure the next generation can utilise them to develop science further, to make new innovations that will help our species progress further. Like say, what's the point in the Large Hadron Collider and all these silly little experiments? Well, okay, let's say the same about Maxwell's equations and Faraday. If we didn't know about electromagnetism, we wouldn't be able to generate electricity and power our houses the way we do. If we, look at the study of quantum mechanics and we say, well, what was the use in that? Well, now it's developed all these computers and the technology we see around us. And then now people are saying, well, what's the point in spending millions of pounds smashing atoms together? What the thing is, the discoveries come first, engineering comes after. As they say, physicists come up with the ideas and then they give it away to the engineers who play with it. And that's the importance of people like Stephen Hawking, is leaving behind that legacy of a new idea that will then open up the gateway for more questions to be asked, but then also leave something behind for people to tinker with. And perhaps one day in the future, maybe we harness gravity like they did in Interstellar. I'm not saying, I know it's a far-fetched idea, but we don't know. We don't know what it could lead to, and that's the answer. We don't know.
And then his work becomes incredibly important, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and we should constantly strive for new ideas, new innovations. For selfish reasons, really. I want, if I have kids, I want them to be healthy and go on to have a prosperous life. I want everyone to have that. Everyone in this day and age deserves food on the table, roof over their head, and a basic education for free. You know what I mean? that's the kind of world we should
strive to.
Strive to, yeah. And you should do that for selfish reasons, because someone else doing better is only going to help you do better. And that's the point in science is if you're not interested, don't shun it, because it might just improve your life. I mean, look what it's already done. If science wasn't there as it is now, most of us would have died through disease, or just a simple, I broke my arm and punched my skin and there you go, disease taking you. So I think legacy with these scientists is hugely important, and Stephen Hawking, what a legacy he has left behind. So
that's a great place to finish. So I'm just going to say that I think we was talking about his legacy in terms of where he'll stand amongst leaders in science, and I think he does deserve a place amongst the people that we spoke about earlier.
Absolutely.
I want to thank Phil today for talking to all of us, and I'll leave links if he wishes to where you can find him, any social, if you actually want to interact. The podcast wouldn't be what it is if I didn't have people to talk to, and people with massive interests about subjects. And I think that your interest in science is obvious when you think about how long we spoke about the subject.
It's my idea. Yeah, that's it.
So thank you for talking to me, buddy, and
thank you.
We'll see you all in the next one. No worries.
Sound.